So I wanted to start this off, before we actually get to what Jen has to say, by issuing an unreserved apology. Last week and the week before, Matt Slick was on the show, but after last week's show, Matt sent me an email, and he was listening, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong camera. He was listening to the post-show webcast and was under the impression that I called him a liar. I don't think that I did. I think what happened was I questioned his honesty as a part of a discussion, and I know this is what happened at dinner afterwards, as a part of a discussion about where is the disconnect? Was there just a failure to communicate? Were we talking past each other on a point? Was I simply wrong? Was I failing to communicate? Or is he being dishonest, as so many apologists before him have been? And I don't think that I made any conclusion. I simply questioned it. But if the implication was there that I was calling him a liar, then I apologize for that. You can make up your own mind, because I'm going to address what's happened since last week. When you're presenting a logical argument, you have the burden of proof. That's, in fact, the entire goal here. You have something that you're trying to convince someone from, and the argument itself is your attempt to meet that burden of proof. As we discussed a little bit last week and on some of the boards, when it comes to logical arguments, there are two possible avenues of critique. One is validity. Is the structure of the argument sound? And in a validly structured argument, true premises always lead to true conclusions. In a logically invalid structure, you can't tell whether the conclusion is true or false because the structure is invalid. True premises might lead to a true conclusion. They might lead to a false one. False premises could lead to a true one. So if it's invalid, you pretty much need to stop, restructure the argument so that it is valid, so that you can continue, because you're wasting your time. The other avenue of approach is to address the soundness, which goes to the content of the argument. For example, I might reject a premise. If you're the one who's making the argument and somebody rejects your premise, you then have the burden of proof to demonstrate that your premise is true, to get them to accept it. If they don't, if they're just staunchly, no, there's nothing you can do, I'm just not going to accept your premise, okay, then there's no point in really continuing. I mean, you're either not discussing with someone who's rational, or you are unable to make your case, and there's no point in continuing, which is one of the reasons why I put a stop to the call at the point that I did last week. Last week, I demonstrated both of those with regard to the written version of TAG that was up on Matt Slick's website. Actually, it's carm.org, C-A-R-M.org. It's Christian Apologetics Resource Ministry. I demonstrated a structural invalidity in a particular section that deals with, and the basic structure was, logical thoughts are conceptual. They are based on these logical absolutes, and therefore the logical absolutes are conceptual. That is structurally invalid, and to demonstrate this, I used another example, which is I have a concept of an apple, therefore the apple is also conceptual. That demonstrates that there's something wrong there, and it turns out to be a structural invalidity. I also questioned the sound of the argument by objecting to a particular premise, and that premise was that everything is either physical or conceptual. And when and at that point, Mr. Slick had the obligation, the responsibility, in order to defend his argument, to demonstrate the truth of that dichotomy, that physical, conceptual were the only two options in a dichotomy. And in a true dichotomy, it needs to be both exhaustive and exclusive. And in that case, it's exclusive but not exhaustive. In other words, a true dichotomy is physical, not physical. And it's true that conceptual is not physical, but conceptual isn't the only thing in not physical. As a matter of fact, you could point out that the conceptual necessarily is contingent upon the physical, because concepts require minds which are physical. And the only exception to that would be what Slick's trying to do, pardon me, Matt Slick is trying to do later on by claiming that there's some super mind that's not physical that is therefore responsible for these concepts. But I'll get back to that in just a minute. The premise was rejected, and Mr. Slick failed to meet his obligation to demonstrate that it was a true dichotomy. As a matter of fact, his only response was, can you give me another option? It's either physical or conceptual. Can you give me another option? And my answer was neither, which, by the way, I stand by. It's a completely valid response. And he wasn't happy with that response. He wanted a word. Well, give me a word. Give me a label that goes for that neither. You need to give me an example of that neither. Well, the fact of the matter is that even if there was a word that I was unaware of, neither is still a good response. Even if there is no word, that doesn't mean that his dichotomy stands. As a matter of fact, that's how we got all the words we have. We found something that didn't have a label, and we made up a word for it. That's the way things work. The fact that somebody is unable to come up with a particular word is not a testament to the truth of your bald assertion. And simply restating it over and over again and then claiming that because somebody couldn't give you a third option that you accepted, that therefore your dichotomy is true, is, let's see, what's that? It's an argument from ignorance, it's arrogant, it's silly. I can't even put enough adjectives on that. The proof of the dichotomy was his. He failed to meet that. So I thought that, you know, all this aside, we'd move on to something else or whatever. Also, at that point, or around that point, is when he started sidetracking. And instead of defending Tag, he started, I don't want to say attacking me, but addressing me by saying things like, well, I presume that you're an atheist, so I presume you deny God and that you're a philosophical materialist and a philosophical naturalist. Hello. That's a whole lot of hand-waving you've got going on there, because all of that is irrelevant to your argument. If we have defeated your argument and you're ready to concede, please feel free to do so, and we can move on to those other areas. But trying to redirect me towards something that is irrelevant to Tag doesn't make Tag any more sound. It's unsound, and it's invalid, and I showed you why. I didn't declare victory at the end of that for a number of reasons. One is because it's kind of silly. An argument is either valid or invalid, sound or unsound, regardless of our ability to defend or attack it. The argument is what it is. And also, if your goal is to convince someone, then the audience is definitionally the judge for themselves. So it would be pointless for me to sit up here and claim victory. And yet, evidently, Mr. Slick doesn't seem to understand that, because he went around to comments on YouTube videos and starts declaring victory. Oh, yeah, Matt was unable to give me a third option. Oh, ha-ha, I won. You know, Tag stands, it's valid. No. Not only is that childish, but it demonstrates that you're not arguing honestly. So it seems that my questions about your honesty in argument, not in all aspects of life, were at least valid. So maybe, and while I didn't call you a liar, maybe I was onto something with all of these deceptive tactics in the argument. And questioning your honesty was something that was reasonable at the time.